Let me go ahead and start by putting Forrest Frank on notice today, because last Sunday I got home on Easter and my two boys were working on a rap. And so, this is the way it's called Miss the Abyss. And apparently Forrest Frank has become a big deal in the Wood home. And it went like this: let's talk about this, going down to abyss. Not even sure if you'll talk to your sis. Stuck in a prison, talking about all you missing. People all listen while you burn hissing. That's it. That was the rap. All right. I think there were actually more verses than that, but if you ever wondered what pastors' kids do on Easter, that's what they do. They sit around and write raps about heaven and hell. So it is true, though, I think if we all get real honest, that when we're young, at a very early age, we start thinking about kind of dying. It starts to creep into our filter, and then typically, we'll push it away. We'll stop thinking about it for a while, but it tends to pop up every once in a while, and so we distract ourselves. In fact, death has often been called the greater final confusion. This idea that for us as Christians, or those who understand that there's more than just Darwinian evolution, God creates man. And then man is created as like this king, this figure who's supposed to have dominion over the world, but then very quickly in the human story, death enters and it takes over. And sadly, this death is like a Sharpie to a Rembrandt, like a Sharpie to the Mona Lisa, where man is no longer what man was, and man is no longer what he will be. But yet he's this figure that is constantly groping. And even as he rises from his teenage years and hits about the age of 20 to 25 at his or her peak standing upright, already by 26, 27, 28, he or she begins to start kneeling over. And the hair begins to gray, and the knees begin to buckle. And how interesting that we end up our life culminating the way that it began, horizontally on our back. And we're going to be looking at all of that this morning, because there's no way to stop it. I know everyone in the room would agree it's a destructive force. Death is a predator. It is a frightening reality that keeps encroaching upon us. It doesn't matter whether you go to Whole Foods and eat. It doesn't matter whether you exercise 2-3 times a day. It doesn't matter how many vitamins we take, how much collagen we try to pump. At the end of the day, this thing just keeps coming, and there's no way to stop it. And that's why by the time you get to the end of your life, you want to have an answer. In fact, this morning, you're really, really, really going to want to lock in, because when you get to your funeral, you want to make sure that the guy that we are about to study shows up. Because if he doesn't, then death is going to lead to hell, and hell is going to be your future, and there is no other option. And so if you would, take your Bibles and join me in John chapter 11. John chapter 11. I'd like you to look at John 11. We're going to look at most of the chapter this morning. And this is a perfect post-Easter message, because this is the man who can carry us through death. And he promises that he will if we will simply trust him. But death is not easy. Death is an enemy. It is a predator. It is evil. It comes with pain. It comes with confusion. It comes with questions. And so if you do not have him, then it will be hopeless, all right? So let's jump into this famous story together in John chapter 11. Begin with me in verse 1. Let's start with the puzzle of death, the confusion of death. And then we'll go on to the hope that comes beyond death. John intros this story by telling us about a man who is sick. And I would imagine that most of you know who this man is. His name is Lazarus. So read with me. A certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. And it was the Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. So I want you to see here at the beginning how much confusion is in this home because of Lazarus' illness. And most of you know Martha as the energetic busybody, and Mary you'll see as the sweet softy. But even Jesus' own disciples are going to be spinning in confusion. And Lazarus is probably best viewed as the little brother. And that really helps us picture the story and a lot of its rawness in a different way, right? When you realize, oh, okay, so these are like two 20-something sisters with like a little brother who's supposed to still have his life ahead of him, but instead he's fallen really ill, and we'll see here in a moment that he's about to die. And that actually helps us understand why there's so much grief, because young people are not supposed to die. And so in verse 3, the sisters send to him, meaning Jesus, the rabbi, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. The text message is so simple. You love him. You come to our home all the time for hospitality. He's one of your favorites. You kick your sandals off here. You know that we want to follow you with all that we are, and your little buddy, he's really ill. The understanding would be that Jesus would immediately respond. And that's real life, right? When you go through heartache and crisis and trial, what's the first thing that we do, right? As Christians, we get our discipleship group involved, and then we call the pastors up. We will fire up the Instagram and make sure there's a prayer chain that's going. We've actually had so many of you in the church who've done that, and we circle around you when there's pain. This is real life right here. You're reading real life. But when Jesus heard, he said, this is fascinating, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God. God's got a bigger plan in this particular illness. And in verse 5, if you have a pen, you want to underline this and you want to hold on to this verse the rest of your life. Now, Jesus loved Martha. Highlight that. He loved her. And he loved her sister. And he loved Lazarus. Therefore, when he heard that he was sick, look at this, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. He stayed away. Notice that. His love let a bad thing happen. Because there is this bigger scene that God is going to be painting, and Jesus wants to do something very special in their life and to expose the truth of God in a way, he actually lets the short-term pain transpire. You want to hold on to that the rest of your life when you go through hard times. Verse 7, then after this, he said to the disciples, okay, now it's time. A couple days later, let's go down to Judea again. The disciples said, Rabbi, the Jews were just seeking to stone you down there. You want to go back? You remember if you've been with us the last few weeks, he's at the Feast of Tabernacles, the Jews come to stone him. Then we're at Hanukkah, the Jews come to stone him. He now peels away for a couple weeks, crosses the Jordan to Perea, and says, now it's time to go back. And the disciples are going, if we go back, this is going to be a problem. So Jesus answered, verse 9, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of the world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. All he's saying is, I'm on the Father's calendar. That's what he's saying. So there's 24 hours in a day. And what he's saying is, death is not sovereign. My Father is sovereign. And so long as I am following his will, and it is in the daytime, meaning his hour had not yet come to die, we don't got to worry about nighttime coming. It'll come when he plans for it to come. So trust me. Let's get going. Everything's going to be okay. And after that, he said in verse 11, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but let's go that I can awaken him. And the disciples are totally confused. They're clueless. Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll recover. Now, Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought he was speaking of literal sleep. So they're going, why would we go all the way down there just to wake a dude up? So Jesus therefore plainly said to them in verse 14, Lazarus is dead. And I am glad for your sakes that I wasn't there, so that you may believe. Meaning I'm going to show you something beyond your imagination. It is going to change you guys forever. And then you got to love Thomas. Thomas is Eeyore. Thomas, who is called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, let us go, that we may die with him. Wah, wah. Now, I just want you to have in your mind, real quickly, how real life all of this is. This is the way life really works from our human perspective, right? There's a crisis, and we begin to ask questions. And then even though we know intellectually that God has a bigger plan and he's got all things in his control, still down at the human level, there's a lot of questions that come up and a lot of pain. That's what's happening here. So if you have a pen, would you just write down a couple notes there in the margin next to verse 16? Just write down this one. Number one, our perspective is never and is not God's perspective. We never are going to be able to see everything that God is doing in a situation. You know, when crisis hits, it typically won't make sense. And it's interesting because in the Bible, you'll have moments where you get to see someone at the end of the journey kind of put it together, like Joseph, where he's like, man, why did my brothers throw me in the pit, right? And then why did Potiphar's wife throw me under the bus, right? And then why did they leave me in the dungeon when I interpreted their dreams, right? And then at the end, we get to see the story some 8-9 chapters later where he's able to see kind of a snapshot of what God was doing. But that's actually more rare than the way it is for most of us, where when we're going through our trial, we get to the end of our life, we may never even see why God did what God did, which means when you're confused, that's okay. The disciples of Jesus walk with him. 3 years they've been with him. They've been hearing him teach over and over and over again. They've watched him work miracles. They've all assented to who he is, and yet they're still sitting here going, we're not sure what all this is about, and they're confused. It's pretty normal in crisis. It's not easy. It's what happens in pain. You know, it's interesting if you've ever been on one of those freeways. You see, you're on a freeway like 405, and then all of a sudden you'll get a copper in front of you, and he starts doing this swervy thing. Have you all seen that? He starts going like this. And I've learned now as an old guy, when I see a policeman start doing that on the freeway, I'm getting off. Right? Because who's ever thought, this will be fun? My kids do that. This will be fun. Let's watch and see what happens. And we all made that mistake. And then they shut the whole freeway down. And now for 5 hours in Los Angeles, we're sitting there and everyone has to go to the bathroom. Amen? And so what you do is you turn on 640, or you pick out your phone or whatever, you turn on the radio. And then all of a sudden they give you the vantage point of the helicopter. Well, this is Rick on 1170. And they tell you what's going on. Some numbskull has pulled a gun, and the policemen have him, and they've got him on the pavement, right? See, we go through life, and we're on the freeway. And we're sitting there parked for 5 hours, and we're going, I don't know what's going on. I'm just stuck. And very rarely do we get the chopper view of God where we're able to actually understand all of the things that are transpiring around us, which is why, if you want to write something down, write this down. Christ delayed in order to strengthen their faith. That is one of those truths you want to hold on to the rest of your life. In the periods of puzzle and the periods of pain, when you're looking out in front of your life and the freeway is shut down and you're going, I don't know, God, why you would let all this happen to me. You can trust that Jesus has a plan. And he's strengthening your relationship to him. Which then allows Jesus to bring, ready, number 2, the hope. The hope beyond death in verse 17. So when Jesus came, he finally comes and he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. So Jewish tradition was you mourned for 3, and then by day 4, when the body was decomposing, and you can picture the whole deal, you know, the maggots and the smell and pus, that's all started. The idea is it's over. So he comes on the 4th day to make sure there's no doubt that Lazarus is dead. Now, Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them. Those are professional mourners. I'm not going to do the sound that they make because it's horrific. Martha, therefore, when she heard that Jesus was coming, went to meet him. Now, who has seen I Love Lucy episodes? Everyone ever seen I Love Lucy? Okay, good. So you remember Lucille Ball? That's Martha, right? Aggressive, Vita Vita Vegemin, always involved in everything, always talking, always moving fast, right? That's the picture we get of the kinetic energy of Martha. A lot of opinions, a lot of aggression. Martha, therefore, ran out to Jesus. She goes tearing down the path, and she said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That's so real. Crisis hits, and immediately we fall to our face and we go, God, where are you? You know, let's just be honest. Like, where were you when I was abused? Where were you when my daddy died? Where were you when my daughter went prodigal? Where were you, Lord? Where were you? Aren't those real questions that we all begin to ask? Martha says, where were you, Lord? But notice her faith is still there, verse 22. Even now I ask that whatever you ask of God, God will, even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will, in fact, give you. She still believes that Jesus can do something powerful. Interesting, Martha gets a bad rap along with Peter, but those are two people that are always believing in Jesus. And Jesus said in verse 23, Martha, your brother is going to rise again. And Martha said, well, I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. I know. That's Lucy. Now, she is showcasing the faith of a good Jew. A good Jew, Job chapter 19 or Daniel chapter 2, would simply believe that in the end, Yahweh, there's an event coming, an event where Yahweh was going to resurrect, bodily resurrection, those who had believed in him, and they would all rule with him in the coming kingdom. That was their belief. So Jesus now is going to correct her understanding and say, it's not about an event, Martha. It's about trusting a person. That's the correction in verse 25. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the what? Very good, the life. And he who believes in me shall live even if he dies. So, Martha, it's not about an event, it's about a person. And that person is me. And even if you physically die, you will spiritually live. Now, does everyone here, show of hands, know how it's going to work spiritually and physically when we die, where you're going? Does everyone know? All right, no one knows. So let me tell you. Very good. 2 people know. Watch. When you die, dust to dust, your body is going to go into the ground and break up. You guys all know that because you go to a funeral and you watch it happen. Now, this is kind of weird to think about. Your particulate matter begins to break down. The little animals and bugs come in, the maggots and whatever, and they chew it all up. And then, they leave it there as fertilizer in the dust, which is interesting because then we plant crops and then they germinate and grow up. And so really then we eat those plants. And so really you're eating each other. We don't think about that often. Yeah, kind of gross, right? Or in maritime, you've got some sailor and they push him overboard and the fishies come and eat him, and then you go to sushi and, work it all out, right? Some of you never thought about that. There's dust everywhere. You're walking on dead people all the time. But the point is, it's dust to dust. Humanity is dust. The body dies. Now, if you believe in Jesus, he's going to tell us that here in the next verse, then guess what? Your body goes in the ground, but your soul, boom, immediately goes to be with him. It's not like there's a point of time in between. A lot of times in the movies, the way we picture it is like the guy's dying, and he's like, I love you. And then he rolls over, and then the camera pans from the top as if he's going up. That's not the way it is in the Bible. Your body dies, boom, you're with the Lord. And then Jesus says, anastasis, bodily resurrection, standing upright in the end. The Lord is going to, in a way that we cannot comprehend, take the soul that's been with him in heaven, resurrect the body from the earth, bring all that particulate matter together in a glorified form, and you're going to have a new body. And you're going to serve him with that in the new heavens and the earth forever. That's what the Bible teaches. But the only way to get both a physical resurrection and immediately spiritual life is if, look at verse 26, everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. That's it. You trust me. And Jesus says, if you trust me, Martha, I'm going to implant my divine life into you. And your body will die, your soul will stay with me, and one day your body will also be resurrected to be with me forever. That's what Jesus teaches. And that really is new revelation. That is progressive revelation in the Bible. And Mary, of course, or Martha, becomes a wonderful Christian. Look at verse 27. She said she is an example of an early Christian, Christianity. She said, yes, Lord, I have believed that you are the Christ, the Son of God, even he who comes into the world. Notice every single line that she says. I have believed you are the Christ, divinity, the Son of God, divinity, who comes into the world, humanity. She says, I believe you are the God-man, the substitute, the mediator. This is an early example of true Christianity. Christianity. She's a Christian. Now, what I think is so amazing about Martha's story here is that she's facing the impossible, which is what the Lord does. He puts us in these situations that are almost too heavy for us to carry. Anybody ever been in one of those? If you're a little bit older, you've been there. Sarah, back in the Older Testament, says, there's no way I can have a baby in my 90s. Moses is looking over his shoulder at Pharaoh's armies coming and pressing him up against the Red Sea. Israel is standing looking at the walls of Jericho. God brings us to the end of ourselves, and it's in that moment that we find out what we really believe. And Martha, in her moment of impossibility, goes, I believe that you are the God-man, and that whatever you say, you can do. We find out who we are. Now notice Jesus doesn't just give hope. He also then comes alongside, puts his arms around people with compassion. Number 3, look at this in verse 28. The compassion in death. And when she had said this, she went away and called Mary, her sister, saying secretly, now I love this. Martha now runs home and she's going to get sweet softy. That's Mary, okay? So she called Mary, her sister, saying secretly, Mary, Mary. Why she's doing that is because all the mourners are in the house and they're wailing. That's their job. So she goes sneaking around the back gate and she comes in, she peeks in the window and she says, Psst, Mary, psst, Mary. And then Mary says, what? Wipes away the tears from her eyes. The teacher is here and he's calling. And when she heard, Mary arose quickly. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still back where Martha had met him. Now the Jews then, who were with her and consoling her, when they saw Mary rise quickly, they went out, they followed, supposing she was going to the tomb to weep. So Mary goes peeling off down the garden path, and behind her come all these professional mourners. And that would have been so horrific. She's like, I want to see Jesus. And they're going, More! And they're following behind her. Which explains the scene of ultimate sadness that we've all heard and read so many times. Look at it, verse 32. Therefore, when Mary came where Jesus was, she saw him. Now, I need you to finish this with me because every time we see Mary, we always see her in the exact same place. You ready? Verse 32. When Mary came where Jesus was, she saw him, read it with me, and fell at his. Every time we see Mary in the Bible, do you know where she is? At his feet. Listen, when you go through crisis, you will have questions and you will have crying, but make sure that your questions and your crying never keep you from his presence. There are some of you in the room right now, this moment, and you're going, man, I have been through it. I don't understand what God's doing. I am broken by what God is doing. Do not let your period of confusion keep you from throwing yourself at his feet and saying, Jesus, please come and comfort me and be close to me in my pain. Because look at how he responds in verse 33. When Jesus, therefore, saw her weeping, and all the Jews who'd run behind weeping, this word is amazing in the Greek. He was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. He is indignant. He grows righteously angry. In fact, the word in Greek is the same word that's used of horses or dogs when they snort. Have you ever got your dog frustrated? You're playing with it, and it gets a little too frustrated, or maybe you bump it in the nose and it goes, or if you ride horses, you kind of jab it a little too hard and it goes, that's the word. I don't know what Jesus was doing, but he went, because his buddy who he loved, the image bearer of God, is in a tomb, and he's decomposing, and he's maggots and pus, and his beloved little girls that he had cared for are running out going, our brother's dying. And everyone's crying, and his disciples are confused. And inside Jesus, he looks at it and he goes, I hate death. I hate sin. I hate death. I don't like it. In fact, who's over the age of 30? Do you remember 9/11 in the Twin Towers? Do you remember when that happened? Do you remember what you felt on the inside? Did you know that week, remember George W. Bush goes down and he stands there with the megaphone and that whole thing? Did you know that week there were more young people that enlisted for the military than there had been since Pearl Harbor? You know why? Because everyone in their 20s and in their teens was watching that going, that's not okay. That's the feeling. I don't like it. And in verse 34, you can sense this is like Tom Brady walking onto a Super Bowl field. This is Michael Jordan in an NBA Finals. This is a prize fighter. This is the OK Corral. For 4,000 years, death has been victorious. That's the champ, reigning champion, until this moment. And he steps into the ring, onto the Super Bowl field. And he said, verse 34, where is he? Let me at him. And he wept. The Greek there is the tears begin to fall. It's like his heart is deep and his voice is quivering, right? Evil is not an illusion. Death stings. And our Lord is not a stoic. His knowledge allows compassion. And he is a high priest who sympathizes with our pain. Sometimes we picture God, and we use these big theological terms like he's sitting up there, and because he's immutable, it's like, well, everything's fine. In Jesus as the God-man, you can know that he feels what you're going through. Which leads us in conclusion to his power over death. Look at verse 37. Some of them said, could not this man who opened the eyes of him who was blind have kept Lazarus from dying? And Jesus, therefore, being deeply moved, came to the tomb, and now it was a cave, and the stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, remove that stone. And if you have a King James version, you have the single best version for this verse. Martha, the sister, said, Lord, we can't do that. He stinketh. That's literally what she says. He's marinating in his own pus. Martha is right there saying, it's over. Lord, thank you. It's over. And then verse 40, Jesus said, did I not tell you, Martha, if you believed, you would see the glory of God? And so they removed the stone. And then in the Greek, you can't see it in the English, but literally it's as they lifted the stone, Jesus lifted his eyes. And you can almost hear the gladiatorial music begin to swell. They lift the stone. Jesus lifts his eyes as if to say, I am about to do something mighty. And he said, verse 41, Father, I thank thee that thou heard me. That is a boast. I know what I'm about to do. I know that you've answered. That's like Michael Jordan holding up his follow-through, hitting a game winner. But the only reason, verse 42, that I'm going to say these words is so that these humans all around me know who I am and what I can do. In verse 43, when he had said these things, I know you all want to do this with me, I can tell. You've all read the verse, you've taught your Sunday school classes. We all love to say the 3 lines, so here, let's do it together. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice. You ready? We're going to do it on 3. He cried out with a loud voice. You ready? Lazarus, come forth. Let's do it again. You did really well. They not so much. And he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. Very good. You know, in Greek, that's one word, hither. Come on. Whoop, whoop. verse 44, he who had died came forth. He is not a mummy. He is not walking slow. He is in full strength. He probably comes leaping out and says, "Get these dirty rags off of me." What happened? He is fully alive. Now, show of hands. Knowing that this is our Bible church, I've been with you now for 10 to 15 years. I know that I've taught this before. Show of hands. Who has ever in their entire life, Sunday school included, studied the story of Lazarus before? Show of hands. Okay, I figured that. So I'm going to throw something at you that I don't know that most of us do know. All right? Who knows what the name Lazarus actually means? Stumped you. You ready? You got your pen? Right next to the end of the story there in verse 44, write this, keep it the rest of your life. The name Lazarus simply means, you ready? God help. Did you know that? So with that in mind, I want you to now go back through the story again. Here you have John, the author, saying, here's the high points of Jesus' ministry. I'm writing this so that you will all believe that he is in fact the Son of God. And he gets to the culmination point of Jesus' ministry on earth, and the final story is that there is a champion called death who has been victorious for 4,000 years. And before Jesus dies, he comes rolling into a little town 2 miles from Jerusalem amidst confusion and pain and bewilderment. And a new champion steps onto the field and says, "You will no longer win." Which means if you're sitting in the room like me and you're starting to feel a little older, I see some heads nodding, your skin's beginning to sag, your hair's beginning to go, Massaro. Our hair's beginning to gray, our backs are beginning to bend. And we're starting to kind of go back the way that we came. You're born flat and naked, and you die flat and naked. You had better hope that this man shows up at your funeral. Because if he's not a part of your funeral, we got no chance. There was a man named Dan Richardson once who found out he got pancreatic cancer and he was going to die in a few months. And so in the hospital, he sat down with a pen and he began to write. And in fact, I pulled his notes here. He told his wife, when his wife got to the hospital, he said, "Hey, listen, when I go, I want you to give this as the program to everyone who attends." And so everyone came into the funeral, typical nostalgia slides playing like we always do, and the music and the whole thing. But then when they sat down, they all had a program, and it had his picture on the front, and then it had this little thing that he wrote at the bottom, even before they flipped it open to look at the order of service. Now here's what he wrote. Dan Richardson, some 35, 40 years ago. He said, "Cancer won't win." And then he goes on, it's like a poem. He says, "Cancer is limited. Cancer cannot cripple love. Cancer cannot corrode faith. Cancer cannot eat away peace. Cancer cannot destroy confidence. Cancer cannot kill friendship. Cancer cannot shut out memories. Cancer cannot silence courage. Cancer cannot invade the soul. Cancer cannot reduce eternity. Cancer cannot quench the spirit, and cancer cannot steal our resurrection. Cancer won't win." End quote. You imagine sitting at a funeral, you walk in, and there's the dude dead as a doornail. Poor Dan. And then you go sit in your seat and you read that. See, if you come in the room right now and you're going, I think I've got a better answer for what I'm going to do when I'm 6 feet under, I'd love to hear it. In fact, can you come talk to me? Because I know you don't. This is the man who says, I am the resurrection and the life. So let's do this. We've got 4 minutes. Let's do a mental exercise together, all right? Let's do this. Close your eyes with me. Just close your eyes. It's a little mental exercise. I want you to put on your creative, intuitive thinking cap with me, okay? And we're doing this together. I'm kind of just making this up as I go. So let's do this together. You ready? Here we go. Eyes closed. Let your breathing calm. And let your pulse settle a little bit. Just kind of forget everything outside the room for the next few moments, just for 2-3 minutes if you're willing. You know, just be thankful your children are in children's ministry. They can't interrupt you. It's just you. Forget about your spouse right now. It's just you. Try to picture with me a white room. And you're laying in that white room, but you can't move. You tell your eyes to open, but they won't. And all that you hear around you is the mumbling of friends and family. Go ahead and picture them. Your spouse is there, sitting on a chair next to the bed that you're lying in. It's a teal chair with wood frames. You can hear behind you a click-clack of a clipboard, some soft but fast-paced talking of nurses in their pink outfits. There's a white linoleum floor, and off in the distance you can hear some muffled tears, and you realize, oh, that's your granddaughter who you've loved and who has grown into such a beautiful young woman. And then you can hear the voice of your son who's quietly praying over her there in the background. And outside the hallway in the distance, you can hear the roller beds being rolled up and down the hallway with echoes. You so desperately want to sit up, but there's no strength. Your mind is saying sit, but your body won't move. You want to comfort those that you've led, but you cannot. The most prominent sound right to your right by your head comes from a monitor with a blinking pulse meter on it. That's the sound that you hear so strong. Doop, doop, doop. Until all of a sudden you feel your breathing labor. Like you're going to cough, but you can't. There's a choke and a gurgle. It feels like you're suffocating. You hear more alarms go off. Suddenly your son is holding your hand, squeezing and praying and saying, Daddy, Daddy, but you cannot squeeze back. Mommy, Mommy, but you cannot squeeze the hand of your son who you had carried for so long. The darkness grows thicker until suddenly that beeping is one long tone. the voices fade. Right there. Right here. What happens next? If there is any doubt in your mind right now about what happens there, then you do not get up out of your chair today until you have that answer resolved. Jesus said, I am your resurrection. Finish it with me. I am the way, and I am the truth, and I am the... That's right. And no one is going to come to the Father but through me.